In this next segment, let's take a look at the Li Gua in period 9, what it represents so that it's easier for us to align our mindset. When we look at the Li Gua itself, as I mentioned earlier on, it is actually the trigram that represents fire. And if you look at actually fire, in the center, it is actually of a different color. And if you look at the trigram, it is actually made up of two separate lines. So in period 8, where it is the mountain, it actually shows basically security and stability. And therefore people yearn for security, and they will climb the corporate ladder, they will do whatever it takes, overcome obstacles, go with greed to basically achieve conquering that mountain and being at the top position. What about Li Gua in terms of the two broken lines in the middle? It actually means insecurity. As I mentioned earlier on in the previous segment, insecurity then brings us to the reason why in the two recent votes on both YouTube and Telegram, it shows people are worrying about their security as they retire. Now, why is that the case? It is because when we look at the Li Gua with the two broken lines and the insecurity itself, it brings up the fear in all of us. Just like when we see fire, at times when it's out of control, it is basically fear. But if you utilize light in the correct sense, it becomes a beacon of light, bringing us to where we want to go in terms of hope and faith. So I will talk a little bit more about the beacon of light, hope and faith a little later on. Let's focus more on when the fire is out of control and the fear being an issue. Why is this occupying a lot of the voters' mind in today's world, including myself when I'm moving forward and thinking about my next phase in life? It is basically because we are all brought up with the security in our mindset that we should retire and basically do well, and therefore we start to plan when we are younger, just like in the mountains case, how you plan your route to move towards the top of the mountain, have progression, go for career, study hard in terms of education as well. But with the onset of period 9 and the changeover, this basically planned out path doesn't seem secure anymore, and therefore insecurity sets in, especially when we talk about retirement. So what does it mean by retirement? I did a search and found out that actually the term retirement was coined only in the industrial age, mainly because employers do not want to have their staff have long-term or what we call lifetime employment. So therefore they will retire their staff and basically give them a pension fund. But as you can see, as we move towards period 9, a lot of these pension funds are gone. So the insecurity sets in even further. And therefore, if you look at retirement, if from the employer's perspective is putting an end to a person's career, it generally means that the person is no longer relevant or no longer employable. So for a lot of us, when we hear the word or even think about retirement, actually subconsciously, it generally means we are no longer relevant. That's why you will say retire an old t-shirt or retire an old item that we do not want. So when we look at this, obviously internally, we will definitely have the fear and the insecurity itself. So if we were to look at this word and no longer use the word retirement, don't you think it is actually better? When we are looking at moving on, just like in the luck pillars of our Bazi, we should be looking at it from the next phase of our life. We plan for our next phase of our life because our priorities change, but we will still need to basically stay relevant, because if not, we'll end up in an identity crisis. Because when you're working, and especially if you're at the top of a career rank, you are the CEO, or you are the so and so manager, or you're the director of a company, when you retire, what do you become? Who am I? The question will come, and therefore fear sets in. So a lot of people are worrying about this because we become non-employable, we are no longer relevant, we are no longer useful. But if we were to look at it from the perspective of if we are moving on to the next phase of life, then so long as we stay relevant, that is crucial. Two, in the vote itself, people are talking about insecurity in wealth. But if you were to look at a lot of times when people talk about planning for retirement, and a lot of clients that I spoke to basically have an X amount in their mind, of course you're going to worry because you're trying to see whether you can reach that goal. And if inflation kicks coming in, then therefore we are always chasing that forever unreachable number. And then again, insecurity and fear sets in. But I think it's crucial for us to remember that wealth is actually a flow. So if we are looking at it as a flow, then we should not retire the flow. And therefore we should not retire ourselves. Don't you think so? We may move on to the next phase of our life and maybe do what we want to do with a either slightly smaller flow or a different flow, but it should not be a stop in the flow. Therefore, we should never step into retirement, but we should move on to the next phase, and you can call it semi-retirement. It can be an easier form of life, from full-time employment to part-time employment, from full-time employment to freelance or side gig. It should be that way. It should not be a retirement or a stop of flow of wealth. Why is this the case? Because for a lot of clients that I have basically consulted, including myself when I decided to stop work for about 2 years, when money or flow doesn't come in, no matter how much you have in that reservoir, something happens to your head because there's no flow. If you only have an outflow and no inflow, our mind will not work well. So therefore, when you're looking at security in terms of the Li Gua, in addressing the insecurity, we should never think about retirement. We should think about how do we prepare ourselves from a mindset perspective to move to the next phase of our life, so that we can have a continuous flow and therefore insecurity does not set in. Hi, welcome to this segment. And if you realize I'm not in my regular setting, I'm in Bali and in the middle of the forest itself. So let me show you where I am. Don't you find that the scenery is fantastic? With it showing the forest. This is where my villa is. Now, you may ask, why am I in Bali? As I mentioned earlier on, I'm also similar like many of you, exploring my next phase of life. And for me, I think it's always good to take a step back, take a break, reflect, and see exactly what is it that we really want.